Canada's public safety minister says he's shocked by reports that convicted killer Paul Bernardo has quietly been transferred to a medium security prison.
Now, according to multiple sources, Bernardo has left his cell in Millhaven Maximum Security Penitentiary for a medium security facility in Quebec.
On February 17, 1993, a chill swept across Canada as law enforcement arrested one of the nation's most heinous criminals of all time, Paul Bernardo. Known for committing a series of horrific assaults and homicides in the late 1980s and 1990s, his reign of terror had finally come to an end. But 30 years later, Bernardo, the infamous attacker, finds himself at the center of a new controversy. Canada's prison service has moved him from a maximum security prison to a medium security facility, a decision sparking outrage across the country. So who is Paul Bernardo? Who are his victims? Did he work alone? And why is this a big deal? Paul Bernardo, born on August 27, 1964 in Scarborough, Ontario, had a seemingly normal childhood, but unfortunately, that was only a facade to mask a truly troubled childhood. Everything appeared ordinary, at least that was until his dearly beloved father was arrested for child abuse. After his father was convicted, his mother, Marilyn, was deeply affected by the fact that her husband, Kenneth, was not Bernardo's biological father, a secret she kept hidden for years. This unspoken truth created a tense, tragic environment that was a catalyst for Paul's troubled behavior. In 1987, at a pet convention, Paul met Karla Holmolka. Karla was young and full of life, and Paul was quickly drawn to her. There was an instant connection, and it wasn't long before they were deeply in love. On the surface, their relationship seemed like any other, but behind closed doors, it was far from normal. However, long before his conviction, and possibly long before he met his beloved bride, Paul had a deep, dark secret. He would stalk young women before committing horrifying acts on them. The attacks grew in brutality and duration, and soon Bernardo earned a name that would send chills down the spine of every Canadian. On May 4, 1987, Bernardo committed his first known assault. He brutally assaulted a 21-year-old woman for over half an hour right in front of her parents' house. Just 10 days later, he attacked again, this time targeting a 19-year-old in her own backyard. Despite his growing boldness, not all his attempts were successful. On several occasions, his intended victims fought back, their screams ringing out into the night, and he was forced to flee. But these instances did little to slow his sickening spree. With each attack, the public grew more fearful, and Bernardo grew more bold. On December 23, 1987, he attacked a 17-year-old with a knife he used to threaten his victims. Bernardo had a close call on May 25, 1988, when an investigator noticed him lurking near a bus shelter. The officer chased after him, but he managed to slip away. Just days later, he was at it again, committing his sixth assault in Clarkson, about 40 kilometers southwest of Scarborough. The police stepped up their efforts, forming a special task force in November of 1988. They released a composite sketch of the attacker and received numerous tips. Despite this, Bernardo continued to evade them. As the number of victims rose, so did the length and brutality of the attacks. Some assaults lasted over 2 hours, a horrifying ordeal for the victims. By May 1990, Bernardo had committed his 11th known assault, and the victim's detailed description enabled the creation of a new, more accurate composite sketch. Shortly after the sketch's release, police received tips that Bernardo fit the image. In July 1990, they interviewed him, but despite the evidence mounting against him, he was able to convince them of his innocence. The well-spoken, friendly young man seemed far removed from the image of a vicious predator. After his release, Bernardo moved to St. Catharines. He held a secret meeting with Homolka, ensuring her he was not the one committing those disturbing acts, even as his crimes continued. But Karla, as we would soon learn, wouldn't even mind. A few weeks before their marriage, the couple ganged up to commit an outrageous crime against Karla's own sister, young Tammy Homolka. Apparently, Paul was in love with Tammy because he fantasized about having relations with a virgin, and so he asked Karla to set her up for him, which she did happily to please her ever-loving boyfriend, but things didn't go quite as planned. Tammy Homolka was their first known victim. Bernardo's obsession with her eventually led to her death. Tammy was drugged on sleeping pills Karla had stolen from her workplace, after which she was assaulted, however. She unfortunately choked on her vomit because of the drugs and passed away almost immediately. The couple's actions were cold and calculated, even going as far as trying to revive Tammy and cover up the evidence before calling 911. Her death was initially ruled as accidental, a fact that would add to the devastating blow when the true circumstances surrounding her demise were eventually revealed. The family was left to grieve the loss of a young girl, only to later find out that she was a victim of an unspeakable crime at the hands of someone they trusted. Leslie Mahaffey was 14 years old when she became their next victim. After being lured and kidnapped by Bernardo, she was subjected to horrific assaults and torture. Her life was brutally taken from her, and her remains were callously disposed of, cemented into blocks, and thrown into Lake Gibson. The discovery of her remains on the same day that Bernardo and Homolka were married only makes it worse. But they were only just starting. 15-year-old Kristen French would be their next victim. Abducted in broad daylight, she was held captive for 3 days, during which she was repeatedly assaulted and tortured. She was then killed, and her body was discarded near a cemetery, once again showing how cruel and inhumane these crimes were. But there was a survivor, a girl known as Jane Doe. She was assaulted while unconscious and at one point even stopped breathing but was revived. The fact that she was unaware of the crimes committed against her due to the drugs she had been given only serves to underscore the ruthlessness and deceptiveness of Bernardo and Homolka. The later realization of what had been done to her undoubtedly caused severe psychological and emotional trauma. These crimes sent shockwaves through the communities where they occurred. They created an atmosphere of fear and anger and caused residents to question their safety. Schools, where these young girls should have felt safe, became sites of potential danger, and parents were left feeling helpless and afraid for their children. However, in the midst of the despair, the wheel of justice began to turn in earnest on December 27, when Paul Bernardo assaulted Karla Homolka with a flashlight. The resulting injuries were severe, with a broken rib, 2 black eyes, and an array of bruises. Homolka found herself at the mercy of her co-workers' concerns and her parents' insistence on hospital care. Attempting to mask her injuries as the result of a car accident fell flat. At the hospital, she seized the moment to break free from Bernardo's grasp and filed charges against him, portraying herself as a victim of spousal abuse. Bernardo found himself in custody, although briefly. Coincidentally, around the same time, Bernardo's DNA samples, which had been collected but left untested for 2 years, were finally examined. The results were irrefutable, conclusively tying Bernardo to the series of brutal sexual assaults that had terrorized Scarborough. Karla Homolka found refuge with her aunt and uncle in Brampton, leaving the home she once shared with Bernardo. She took this time to disclose Bernardo's heinous acts as well as the killings of French and Mahaffey. It was then in February that she sought immunity in exchange for her cooperation, a request the authorities swiftly denied. In a race against time, Homolka had a week to decide whether to accept a 12-year manslaughter sentence or face the consequences of charges for 3 homicides and other crimes. She took the deal, choosing to testify against her former husband in his trial, slated for 1995. The trial took center stage in 1995, moving to Toronto from St. Catharines due to the severity of the case. Bernardo found himself facing charges for the gruesome killings of Mahaffey and French, along with numerous other counts. The evidence was overwhelming, especially Homolka's testimony and the graphic videotapes of the assaults. Bernardo initially maintained his innocence, stating that the deaths were accidental and later attempting to pin the blame on Homolka. However, his claims held no water, and on September 1, 1995, he was found guilty of multiple charges, including 2 first-degree homicides and 2 aggravated assaults. His sentence was life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 25 years. The court also deemed him a dangerous offender, a status that significantly reduced the chances of him ever being granted parole. While serving his sentence, Bernardo had experienced isolation and threats from other inmates. On one occasion in 1999, a group of 5 prisoners attempted to breach the segregated area where he was held, leading to the intervention of riot police. Life within the prison has not been easy for him. He has been attacked and harassed, including an instance in 1996 when another inmate struck him in the face after a shower. In 2006, Bernardo made claims of reformation during a prison interview and hinted at his suitability for parole. Nevertheless, due to his convictions for multiple homicides, he was ineligible for release under the Faint Hope Clause. He continues to serve his sentence at the maximum security Kingston Penitentiary, spending 23 hours a day in an 8-foot by 4-foot cell in the segregation unit. Well, at least that was until recently. Paul has found himself at the heart of another controversy while behind bars. An unexpected decision to transfer him from a maximum security prison, Millhaven Institution, to a medium security facility, La Macasa Institution, led to widespread outrage across Canada. This move was seen by many as a softening of his conviction. The lack of clear reasoning behind the Correctional Service of Canada's decision to transfer Bernardo only fueled the public's anger. Their statement failed to outline the motives behind the move. While they acknowledged the horrific nature of Bernardo's crimes, the Correctional Service's hands were tied when it came to sharing detailed information about an offender's case, a restriction enforced by law. The public wasn't alone in expressing dismay at this move. Ontario Premier Doug Ford joined the chorus of criticism, insisting Bernardo should rot in a maximum security prison for the rest of his miserable existence. Despite the backlash, the Correctional Service maintains that Bernardo is still in a controlled and secure environment. They aim to reassure Canadians that they were taking the necessary precautions to ensure public safety, highlighting that they want Canadians to have confidence in our decisions. Yet it remained unclear how this unexpected decision would affect public trust in the correctional system, especially considering Bernardo's notorious past. According to Ontario's Ministry of the Attorney General, Bernardo had assaulted at least 18 women and had been involved in the killings of 3 others between 1987 and 1992, a chilling reminder of the terror he had once unleashed. The case of Paul Bernardo and his horrifying crimes has caused a lot of grief to one too many families and communities. As we await to hear more, our hearts go out to the families that have lost and feel even more loss by this decision.